I woke up that Saturday morning to find my propane tank missing from my back patio. And I knew exactly who took it, because there was a bright yellow citation taped to my grill that read, "Unapproved Outdoor Equipment Violation." My name is Marcus Granger, and I'm the sheriff of Prescott County, Arizona. I just moved into this neighborhood in Prescott Valley 3 months ago, looking for some peace and quiet after my divorce. The house was perfect, a nice ranch-style place with a view of the mountains, and the neighborhood seemed decent enough. What I didn't count on was the homeowners association being run by a woman who made it her personal mission to terrorize everyone on the block. Her name was Patricia Henderson, though everyone called her Patty behind her back, usually followed by some choice words. She was 52 years old with that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," bleached blonde with dark roots showing, always dressed in athleisure wear despite never actually exercising. She drove a white BMW SUV with a custom license plate that said HOA Boss, and had appointed herself the president, vice president, and treasurer of our neighborhood association all at once. I stood there on my patio in my weekend clothes, jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, holding this citation and feeling my blood pressure rise. The thing was, I hadn't told anyone in the neighborhood what I did for a living. I kept my personal life separate from work, drove an unmarked vehicle when I was off duty, and generally just wanted to be a regular guy when I came home. Most of my neighbors probably thought I worked some boring office job. The citation stated that my propane tank violated Code 7.3.2 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently prohibited unsightly gas containers visible from common areas. It went on to say that the tank had been confiscated and would be returned upon payment of a $200 fine and written assurance that the violation would not be repeated. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was Patricia's signature and a note that said, "Next time, follow the rules." I pulled out my phone and dialed the number listed on the citation. It rang 4 times before Patricia answered. "Henderson Residence, HOA President speaking. This is Marcus Granger from 412 Desert Rose Lane. You took my propane tank." "Mr. Granger, yes. I left you a citation explaining the situation. The tank was in clear violation of our community standards. That tank was on my private property on my back patio behind a 6-foot privacy fence. I could see it from Mrs. Chen's second-story window, which counts as a common viewing area. The bylaws are very clear, Mr. Granger. All propane tanks must be screened from view or kept in approved storage containers. So you went onto my property and took my personal belongings. I confiscated community-violating items, as is my right as HOA president. You'll get your tank back when you pay the fine and submit the proper forms." I took a deep breath, counting to 5 in my head. "Mrs. Henderson, what you did is called theft. I'm giving you until this evening to return my propane tank to my property, or I'll be filing a police report." She laughed, actually laughed. "Mr. Granger, I suggest you read your HOA agreement more carefully. Section 12, Paragraph 4 gives the board the right to remove any items in violation of community standards. You signed that agreement when you bought your house. Now, if you'd like to contest this, you can submit a written appeal to the board, which I'll review at next month's meeting. Good day." She hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone. In my 23 years in law enforcement, I dealt with all kinds of criminals. Armed robbers, drug dealers, domestic abusers, you name it. But there was something uniquely infuriating about someone who wielded a tiny amount of power like they were running a dictatorship. I decided to do some research. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop and started reading through them. What I found was interesting. Yes, there were provisions about the board being able to address violations, but the bylaws also clearly stated that the board consisted of 5 elected members, and that any enforcement actions required a majority vote. Patricia had appointed herself to multiple positions, which was already questionable, and she'd taken action without any vote at all. More importantly, the bylaws said nothing about confiscating property. They mentioned fines, warnings, and in extreme cases, liens against properties. But taking someone's belongings, that wasn't in there anywhere. I called my neighbor Tom, who lived 2 houses down. He was a retired accountant who I'd chatted with a few times while getting my mail. "Marcus, hey, how are you doing?" "I've been better." "Patricia Henderson took my propane tank this morning. Did she ever pull anything like that with you?" Tom let out a long sigh. "Oh man, welcome to the club. She took my son's basketball hoop last year, said it was an eyesore, charged me $300 to get it back. We tried to fight it, but she threatened to put a lien on our house. Did you call the police?" We thought about it, but our lawyer said it would cost more to fight than to just pay the fine. Plus, we have to live here, you know. She makes life hell for anyone who crosses her. The Martins across the street fought her on a fence color dispute, and she cited them for violations every single week for 6 months. Dead leaf on the lawn, citation. Trash can visible from the street for 5 minutes after pickup, citation. It was harassment, but she always had the HOA rules to back her up. After I hung up with Tom, I made a few more calls. Turned out, Patricia had been running this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom for almost 5 years. She'd forced out the previous board members by making their lives miserable, and now nobody wanted to run against her because it wasn't worth the hassle. She had a whole filing cabinet full of violations and rules, and she knew them all by heart. But here's the thing. Knowing HOA rules doesn't put you above the law. I got dressed in my uniform. Full sheriff's department getup, badge, utility belt, the works. I drove to Patricia's house in my marked patrol vehicle, the one with the lights on top and the county seal on the door. Her house was the biggest one in the neighborhood, a 2-story Mediterranean-style place with a perfectly manicured lawn and a fountain in the front yard. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass, I could see someone approaching. The door opened, and Patricia stood there in a pink velour tracksuit, her face showing confusion at first, then recognition, then something close to panic. "Can I help you, officer?" "Sheriff," I corrected. "Sheriff Marcus Granger. I believe we spoke on the phone this morning." Her mouth opened and closed a few times. "You're a sheriff." "The sheriff, actually. Prescott County. Now, Mrs. Henderson, I'm here to retrieve my property that was taken from my residence without permission this morning." That was an HOA matter. I'm within my rights." "Madam, I've read the HOA bylaws cover to cover. Nowhere in those documents does it give you the right to enter private property and remove personal belongings. What you did this morning constitutes theft under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 13-1802. I'm giving you one opportunity to return my property immediately, or I will be placing you under arrest. You can't arrest me for enforcing HOA rules. I'm not arresting you for enforcing rules. I'm arresting you for theft. The HOA bylaws don't supersede state criminal law, Mrs. Henderson." She crossed her arms. "I want to speak to your supervisor." "I am the supervisor. I'm the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in this county. Now my propane tank. Where is it?" She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was bluffing. I wasn't. Finally, she turned and walked into her house. I waited at the door, hand resting casually near my radio. She came back a few minutes later, struggling with my 40-pound propane tank. "It's in the garage," she said. I'll have my husband bring it over later. I'll wait while you get it now." Her face flushed red. "This is harassment. I'm going to file a complaint." "You're welcome to do that. The complaint process is available on the county website. In the meantime, my property—" She disappeared again, and I heard her calling for her husband, Richard. He was a quiet guy who worked in insurance and generally seemed beaten down by life. He appeared a minute later, carrying my propane tank, looking embarrassed. "Sheriff, I apologize. I told her this was a bad idea." "It's all right, Richard. Just set it in the back of my vehicle." He did, and I noted that the tank was full just as I'd left it. No damage. I turned back to Patricia, who was standing in her doorway with her arms crossed, fuming. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm not going to arrest you today, but I want to be very clear about something. What you did was theft. If you ever enter my property without permission again, or take any of my belongings, I will arrest you. You understand? The HOA board will hear about this." "The HOA board is you and 2 vacant positions. I checked the public records. You haven't held an actual board election in 3 years. But we'll get to that." I left her standing there and drove back to my house. I unloaded the propane tank, hooked it back up to my grill, and went inside to make some coffee. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, Sunday, I woke up to find 10 citations plastered all over my property. They were taped to my mailbox, my front door, my garage door, and even my trash cans. Each one detailed a different alleged violation. My grass was supposedly 1/4 inch too tall. My house numbers weren't the approved font. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My garden hose was visible from the street. My doormat was an unapproved color. On and on. I collected all 10 citations and took photos of each one. Then I got in my car and drove to the office. Even though it was Sunday, I had work to do. At the station, I pulled up Patricia Henderson's file. Standard background check, nothing unusual. No criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. Married to Richard Henderson for 28 years, 2 adult children who'd both moved out of state. She'd been a real estate agent until about 6 years ago when she retired. By all accounts, she should have been a normal, law-abiding citizen. But I also knew that sometimes people who feel powerless in their own lives seek out positions where they can exert control over others. HOA president was perfect for someone like that. You got authority without oversight, power without accountability. I made some calls. First to the county clerk's office, requesting all the HOA documents on file for my neighborhood, Sunset Hills Estates. Then to a friend of mine who worked in civil law, asking about HOA regulations and what recourse homeowners had. What I learned was interesting. Arizona had passed some laws in recent years to protect homeowners from overzealous HOAs. There were limits on fines, requirements for due process, and specific rules about how HOAs had to be governed. From what I could tell, Patricia was violating about half of them. Monday morning, I was back in my regular routine. I got up at 5:30, went for my usual run, showered, and headed to the office in uniform. I had a full day of meetings, budget reviews, and county business to attend to. But in the back of my mind, I was formulating a plan. When I got home that evening, there was a letter in my mailbox. Not a citation this time, but an official-looking document on HOA letterhead. It informed me that due to repeated and willful violations of community standards, I was being fined $5,000 and that if I didn't pay within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. $5,000 for grass that was supposedly 1/4 inch too tall and a doormat that was the wrong color. I sat in my kitchen and read through the letter 3 times. It cited sections of the HOA bylaws, referenced Arizona property law, and was signed by Patricia Henderson in her capacity as HOA president, vice president, and treasurer. At the bottom was a note in her handwriting. Perhaps now you'll learn to respect community standards. That was when I knew this wasn't just about power. This was personal. This was retaliation. I picked up my phone and called the district attorney's office. I'd worked with the DA, Michael Brennan, for years. He was a good guy, thorough and fair. Michael, it's Marcus. I need some advice on a personal matter. Sure, what's going on? I explained the situation, from the stolen propane tank to the harassment citations to the $5,000 fine. Michael listened without interrupting. So she's retaliating against you because you challenged her authority, he said when I finished. That's what it looks like. And you're the sheriff. I am. Marcus, you know I respect you, but I have to ask. Are you sure you want to pursue this? I mean, we're talking about an HOA dispute. It's going to look petty. Michael, if someone broke into a house and stole a TV, we'd arrest them. If someone tried to extort $5,000 from a victim to avoid false charges, we'd arrest them. The fact that she's hiding behind HOA rules doesn't change what she's doing. You're not wrong. All right, here's what I think. Document everything. Every citation, every communication, every interaction. If you can show a pattern of harassment and prove she's acting outside the scope of the HOA bylaws, we might have something. The theft is clear-cut, but since you got your property back, it's a misdemeanor at best. The retaliation and extortion, though, that could be more serious. What about the other homeowners? She's been doing this to people for years. Talk to them. Get statements. If we can show this is a pattern of behavior, not just a personal dispute between you two, that strengthens the case. I spent the next week talking to my neighbors. What I found was disturbing. Patricia had fined 23 different families over the past 5 years, with total fines exceeding $60,000. She'd placed liens on 4 properties. She'd confiscated everything from basketball hoops to garden gnomes to patio furniture. And in every case, homeowners had paid up because fighting her was more expensive than just giving in. Tom, my neighbor, introduced me to Sandra Chen, whose second-story window Patricia had allegedly used to spy on my propane tank. Sandra was a nurse who worked night shifts and just wanted to come home and sleep in peace. She comes by at least twice a week, Sandra told me, sitting in her living room with a cup of tea. She walks around the neighborhood with a clipboard, taking notes, looking for violations. Last month, she cited me because my Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd. She said they had to be down by January 1st. I worked a double shift on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. I took them down as soon as I could, but she'd already fined me $200. Did you pay it? I had to. She said she'd add $50 a day until I did, and then she'd put a lien on my house. I'm a single mom, Marcus. I can't afford to lose my house over Christmas lights. I interviewed 12 homeowners in total. Every single one had a story. Every single one had paid fines they felt were unjust. And every single one was willing to sign a statement on Friday afternoon. I was in my office when my deputy, James Crawford, knocked on my door. "Sheriff, there's a woman here to see you, says it's urgent." "Who is it?" "Patricia Henderson." "She says she's the president of your HOA." I almost laughed. "Send her in." Patricia walked into my office wearing a navy blue pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio. She dressed up for this, trying to look official and professional. She sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited. "Sheriff Granger, I think we got off on the wrong foot." "Is that so?" "I'm here to offer you a compromise. If you withdraw your complaints about the HOA and pay a reduced fine of $1,000, I'm willing to overlook your violations going forward." "Mrs. Henderson, I haven't filed any complaints. Yet." Well, good. Then we can resolve this amicably. $1,000 and we'll call it even. I leaned back in my chair and studied her. She had that look of someone who was used to getting her way, confident that a combination of intimidation and stubbornness would win out. "Let me make something clear to you," I said. "You stole my property. You then retaliated against me for recovering that property by issuing fraudulent violations and attempting to extort money from me. Those are crimes. The fact that you claim HOA authority doesn't change that. I have every right to enforce community standards. You have the right to enforce legitimate bylaws through proper procedures. You don't have the right to enter private property, take personal belongings, or invent violations as retaliation. And you certainly don't have the right to hold sole authority over an HOA that's supposed to be run by an elected board. I was elected 5 years ago by a vote of 8-3. There were only 11 people at that meeting, and 3 of them were your relatives. Since then, you haven't held another election, even though the bylaws require annual elections. You've appointed yourself to multiple positions, which the bylaws specifically prohibit, and you've been collecting fines and placing liens without proper board approval. Her confident expression faltered. "I don't know what you think you're doing. I'm doing my job. I've spent the last week investigating, and I've found evidence of theft, extortion, fraud, and harassment. I've collected statements from 23 homeowners detailing your pattern of behavior. And on Monday morning, I'm going to present all of this to the district attorney." She stood up abruptly. "You can't do this. I'll sue you for harassment. You're welcome to try. But Mrs. Henderson, here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign from the HOA board. You're going to return every fine you've collected over the past 5 years. And you're going to apologize to every homeowner you've harassed. If you do those things, I might consider recommending leniency to the DA. I'll do no such thing. You know who I am. I have connections. I know the mayor, the city council. I know them too. I work with them every day. Now you can leave my office, or I can have you escorted out." She grabbed her portfolio and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the tile floor. James appeared in the doorway a moment later. "That went well," he said dryly. "She'll be back. People like that always come back." I was right. That evening I came home to find my front yard decorated with a dozen pink flamingos. They were the tacky plastic lawn ornaments, and they'd been arranged in a circle around my mailbox. Taped to my front door was another citation, this one for unapproved lawn decorations. I took photos of everything, then removed the flamingos. They'd been pushed into the ground with stakes, and someone had clearly spent time arranging them just so. I loaded them into my garage and added the photos to my growing evidence file. The next morning, Saturday, I received a call from Richard Henderson. "Sheriff Granger, this is Richard, Patricia's husband. I need to talk to you. Go ahead." "Not on the phone. Can we meet somewhere?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Prescott, away from the neighborhood. Richard was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee that looked untouched. He was a thin man in his mid-50s, with glasses and thinning hair, wearing a cardigan sweater despite the Arizona heat. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "What's this about, Richard? I want to apologize. For Patricia, for everything. I know what she's been doing, and I've tried to stop her, but—" He trailed off, looking miserable. "But what? She's not well. Mentally, I mean. She used to be different before she retired. She was successful, driven, but normal. Then she stopped working and the kids moved away, and she just changed. She became obsessed with the neighborhood, with controlling everything. I've suggested therapy, medication, but she refuses. She says there's nothing wrong with her, that everyone else is the problem. Richard, I appreciate you telling me this, but it doesn't change what she's done. I know. I'm not asking you to drop it. I just wanted you to know that there's context, and I wanted to tell you that I support what you're doing. Someone needs to stop her before she really hurts someone. Has she ever been violent? No, nothing like that. But the stress she's caused people, the money she's cost them. Mrs. Martinez down the street had to take out a loan to pay Patricia's fines. The Johnsons almost lost their house because of a lien. It's not right. We talked for another 20 minutes. Richard gave me details about Patricia's record keeping, where she kept her files, how she tracked violations. He also confirmed that she'd been acting without board approval for years, essentially running the HOA as a one-person operation. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked finally. "Because I'm tired of being complicit. I've stood by and let her do this because it was easier than fighting her. But that makes me part of the problem. If there are legal consequences, she needs to face them. Maybe it'll be the wake-up call she needs." On Monday, I met with District Attorney Michael Brennan and laid out everything I had. Statements from 23 homeowners, copies of citations and fines, photos of confiscated property, financial records showing the money Patricia had collected, and documentation of HOA bylaw violations. Michael reviewed everything carefully, his expression growing more serious as he read. "This is worse than I thought," he said finally. "She's been running what amounts to a racketeering operation. Can we charge her? We can charge her with multiple counts: theft, extortion, fraud, harassment. The question is, what do we want the outcome to be? I want her stopped. I want the homeowners to get their money back, and I want to make sure she can't do this to anyone else. All right, let me talk to the judge and see about getting a warrant. If we can seize her HOA records, we'll have everything we need." 2 days later, on Wednesday morning, I served a search warrant at Patricia Henderson's house. I brought 2 deputies with me, along with a forensic accountant from the county. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe, her face going pale when she saw us. "What is this?" I handed her the warrant. "We're here to seize all records related to the Sunset Hills Estates Homeowners Association. That includes financial records, violation reports, correspondence, and any property you've confiscated from homeowners. You can't do this. It's a legal warrant signed by Judge Morrison. You can read it yourself. We'll be as quick and respectful as possible." She called her lawyer, who arrived 40 minutes later and confirmed that yes, the warrant was valid and yes, she had to comply. We spent 3 hours going through her home office, boxing up files, copying computer records, and photographing everything. What we found was extensive. Patricia had kept meticulous records of every violation, every fine, every interaction with homeowners. She had a filing system organized by address, with detailed notes on each property. But she'd also kept all the money for herself. The HOA bylaws required that fines go into a community fund for maintenance and improvements. But Patricia had been depositing everything into a personal account she controlled. Over 5 years, she'd collected $67,000 in fines. The neighborhood hadn't seen a penny of improvement. The forensic accountant, a woman named Julie, whistled when she saw the bank statements. "This is embezzlement, clear as day." We also found property in Patricia's garage and basement. Basketball hoops, garden decorations, patio furniture, even a small fountain that belonged to the Martins. Everything was labeled with the address it had been taken from and the date of confiscation. When we finished, I found Patricia sitting in her living room, her lawyer beside her. She looked smaller somehow, defeated. "Mrs. Henderson, based on the evidence we've collected, I'm placing you under arrest for theft, extortion, fraud, and embezzlement." "This is ridiculous. I was protecting property values. You were stealing from your neighbors. Stand up, please." She stood and I cuffed her, reading her rights. Her lawyer started talking about bail and court dates, but Patricia just stared at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "I'll make sure of it, Mrs. Henderson. You're not in a position to threaten anyone right now." We transported her to the county jail for booking. Her bail was set at $50,000, which Richard posted the next day. She was released with conditions: no contact with any Sunset Hills residents, no entry to the neighborhood except to her own home, and surrender of all HOA materials and access. The story hit the local news that evening. Local HOA president arrested for embezzlement and extortion. The reporter interviewed several homeowners who shared their stories of harassment and excessive fines. By the next morning, it had gone viral on social media. People across the country were sharing it, commenting on their own HOA horror stories, calling for reform. My phone rang constantly. News outlets wanted interviews. Homeowners from other neighborhoods called asking for advice on dealing with their own problem HOAs. The county commission scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss HOA oversight. Through it all, I just tried to do my job and live my life. I returned all the confiscated property to my neighbors, which took most of a weekend. Each time, people thanked me, shared more stories, expressed relief that it was finally over. The trial was scheduled for 8 weeks later. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been acting within her authority as HOA president, that the bylaws gave her broad enforcement powers. But the evidence was overwhelming. The theft was clear. The embezzlement was documented. The pattern of harassment was undeniable. On the third day of trial, Patricia's lawyer approached the DA about a plea deal. Patricia would plead guilty to theft and embezzlement, return all the money she'd collected, resign from the HOA board, and accept a sentence of 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service. She'd also be prohibited from serving on any HOA board in the future. Michael ran it by me first. "What do you think? Will the homeowners get their money back? Every penny with interest. And she can't do this to anyone else. Not legally, no. Then I think it's fair. Prison time isn't going to help anyone here. But accountability matters." Patricia accepted the plea deal. The judge made it official, and just like that, 5 years of tyranny came to an end. The homeowners of Sunset Hills Estates held an emergency meeting the following week to elect a new board. This time, 43 people showed up. They elected Tom as president, Sandra Chen as vice president, and 3 other responsible neighbors to fill out the board. Their first act was to revise the bylaws, adding term limits, requiring transparent financial reporting and limiting fine amounts. I attended that meeting, not as sheriff but as a homeowner. When it was over, Tom pulled me aside. "Marcus, I want to thank you, not just for stopping Patricia but for showing us we had power all along. We just needed someone to stand up first. You would have done it eventually. Maybe. But you made it happen now, and you saved a lot of people a lot of grief." Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. People stopped being afraid of citations and fines. Kids played basketball in their driveways again. Garden gnomes reappeared on lawns. The Chens put up Christmas lights the day after Thanksgiving and left them up until February, and nobody said a word. Patricia kept to herself after the trial. I'd see her occasionally, getting her mail or pulling into her driveway, but we never spoke. Richard told me she'd started seeing a therapist and was on medication for anxiety and depression. He seemed hopeful that she'd get better, though their marriage was strained. 6 months after the trial, Richard called me again. "Sheriff Granger, I wanted to let you know we're moving. Patricia and I, we're selling the house and relocating to Oregon to be near our daughter." "I'm sorry to hear that, Richard. How is Patricia doing? Better, actually. Getting away from here, from the HOA, from all the reminders of what happened, I think it'll be good for her. The therapist says she was using the HOA as a way to cope with feeling powerless in her own life. Now she's working on healthier ways to deal with that. I'm glad she's getting help. For what it's worth, she asked me to tell you she's sorry. She can't say it to you directly because of the court order, but she wanted you to know. Tell her I appreciate that. After they moved, I bought a new propane tank for my grill. A bigger one this time, and I put it right in the middle of my patio where anyone could see it from anywhere. Nobody said a word. That tank became kind of a symbol in the neighborhood, a reminder that we were free to live our lives without fear of petty tyranny. The case became something of a landmark in Arizona HOA law. The legislature passed new reforms based on what happened in Sunset Hills, creating stronger oversight of HOA boards, limiting their enforcement powers, and establishing clear channels for homeowners to dispute fines and violations. Other states took notice and started implementing similar reforms. I got letters from people across the country thanking me for standing up to my HOA. Some were funny, some were heartbreaking. All of them shared stories of feeling powerless against organizations that were supposed to serve them but instead controlled them. One letter particularly stood out. It was from a woman in Florida who'd been fighting her HOA for 3 years over a dispute about her roof color. She'd spent thousands on lawyers and still hadn't won. But after seeing what happened in my case, she organized her neighbors, documented everything, and took their case to the state attorney general. They won, the HOA board was dissolved, and new elections were held. "You inspired us to fight back," she wrote. "Thank you for showing us it was possible." That's the thing about bullies, whether they're schoolyard thugs or HOA presidents. They rely on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. But once someone stands up, once someone shows it can be done, their power evaporates. A year after Patricia's arrest, Sunset Hills Estates had transformed. The new board had used the returned fine money to actually improve the neighborhood. New playground equipment, better street lighting, a community garden. Property values went up, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because people actually wanted to live there. Tom invited me to the neighborhood's first annual block party. It was a beautiful Saturday in October, perfect Arizona weather, and the whole street was filled with families grilling, kids playing, neighbors actually talking to each other without fear. "You know what's funny?" Tom said, flipping burgers on his grill. Patricia always claimed she was protecting property values and maintaining community standards. But the neighborhood is worth more now, and people are happier than it ever was under her rule. "Control and leadership are different things," I said. She wanted control. You provide leadership. "Well, I couldn't have done it without you." I looked around at the scene. Sandra Chen teaching a group of kids how to play hopscotch, the Martins showing off their restored fountain, Richard's replacement neighbors introducing themselves to everyone. This was what a community should be. My grill was set up in my driveway, propane tank visible and completely legal. I was making ribs my specialty, and about 20 people had already asked for the recipe. As sheriff, I spent my days dealing with the worst of humanity: crimes, tragedies, conflicts. But here, in this moment, I was just Marcus, a guy who lived on Desert Rose Lane and made pretty good ribs. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Someone had brought out a guitar and music drifted down the street. Kids ran past with glow sticks, their laughter echoing off the houses. I thought about Patricia up in Oregon, hopefully healing and finding peace. I didn't hate her. I actually felt sorry for her. She'd been so focused on enforcing rules and maintaining control that she'd forgotten the whole point of a community. People taking care of each other, supporting each other, making life better together. Later that evening, after the party wound down and I was cleaning up, Tom came over with a beer. "The board wanted me to give you something," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a certificate declaring me the Sunset Hills Estates Neighbor of the Year, signed by all 5 board members and dozens of residents. "We know you were just doing your job," Tom said, "but you did it at personal risk and with no obligation to go as far as you did. You changed all our lives for the better." I'll admit, I got a little choked up. In 23 years of law enforcement, I'd received commendations, awards, recognition from the county and state. But this simple certificate from my neighbors meant more than any of them. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Really." The next day, I framed that certificate and hung it in my home office, right next to my sheriff's commission. 2 different kinds of service, 2 different kinds of community, but both important. Months continued to pass, and the neighborhood continued to thrive. The new HOA board was almost boring in how normally it functioned. They held regular meetings with actual quorum. They passed reasonable rules with community input. They managed the neighborhood funds transparently, publishing quarterly reports. It was everything an HOA should be and so rarely is. I eventually told my neighbors what I'd learned from the whole experience. That laws only matter when people enforce them. That authority without accountability becomes tyranny. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up to someone who appears to have power over you. The story spread beyond our little community. I was invited to speak at a national conference on HOA reform, sharing what happened and advocating for better oversight and homeowner protections. Legislators from several states attended, and within 2 years, 15 states had passed laws based partly on the Sunset Hills case. But the best outcome wasn't the laws or the reforms, or even the money returned to homeowners. It was the simple fact that people in my neighborhood could live their lives without fear. They could put up basketball hoops and garden gnomes, paint their front doors whatever color they wanted within reason, and not worry about petty citations or excessive fines. My propane tank sat on my patio for 3 more years until I finally upgraded my grill. When I did, I kept that old tank in my garage, a reminder of how a simple theft had uncovered something much bigger and led to real change. People sometimes ask me if I ever regretted moving to Sunset Hills Estates, given all the trouble with Patricia and the HOA. The answer is always no. Because yeah, there was conflict and stress and a lot of extra work. But there was also justice, community, and the satisfaction of knowing that I'd made a real difference in people's lives. That's what being a sheriff is really about. Not just enforcing laws or making arrests, but protecting people and making communities safer and better. Sometimes that means chasing down dangerous criminals. Sometimes it means standing up to an out-of-control HOA president. Either way, it's about service. As I sit here now, looking back on everything that happened, I realize that Patricia's attempt to steal my propane tank was probably the best thing that could have happened to Sunset Hills Estates. It exposed a system that had been broken for years. It empowered people who'd felt powerless. It created lasting change that affected thousands of homeowners across multiple states, all because someone tried to take my propane tank and didn't know I was the sheriff. The irony isn't lost on me. Patricia spent years wielding power over people, making them afraid, using rules and regulations as weapons. But in the end, she targeted someone who had actual authority, actual knowledge of the law, and the actual ability to hold her accountable. If she'd stolen anyone else's propane tank, she probably would have gotten away with it like she had dozens of times before. But she chose mine, and that made all the difference. Justice isn't always swift or certain, but sometimes, just sometimes, it works out exactly as it should. Patricia faced consequences for her actions. The homeowners got their money back. The neighborhood improved. Laws were changed. And I got to keep my propane tank. In the grand scheme of things, it was a small case. No violence, no drugs, no organized crime. Just a middle-aged woman who let a tiny bit of power corrupt her completely, and a community that finally said enough. But small cases can have big impacts. The way we handle the little injustices determines whether we'll tolerate the big ones. The willingness to stand up to petty tyrants prevents them from becoming dangerous ones. And the courage to enforce the law fairly, even when it's inconvenient or personal, is what separates justice from revenge. I'm still the sheriff of Prescott County. I still live in Sunset Hills Estates. I still grill on my patio every weekend, propane tank visible and proud. And every time I fire up that grill, I remember that sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't against hardened criminals or dangerous gangs. Sometimes they're against people who steal propane tanks and think they can get away with it because they have a title and a clipboard. They can't. Not in my county, not on my watch, and that's exactly how it should be.